whether the president had the legal authority to impose tariffs under the International Emergency Economic.
South Korea's president just dropped the biggest trade bombshell on the United States. And it didn't just cause global embarrassment, it sent the whole Trump administration into panic. After Japan, Indonesia, and Vietnam stepped back from their deals with Washington, South Korea has just walked away from its own $350 billion agreement with Donald Trump. And just like that, it has become clear that all those historic achievements Trump keeps bragging about on TV are actually the empty headlines. But the real question is, why would South Korea, one of America's closest allies for generations, turn its back on a deal it signed just weeks ago? And how could this refusal become the final nail in the coffin for American power in Asia? The friendship between the United States and South Korea began during the Korean War in the 1950s. And for decades, it looked unbreakable. In 2011, they signed the Chorus trade deal, which further deepened their partnership. But under Trump's era, everything changed. His ridiculous and radical policies, which already sent shockwaves around the world, are now affecting the U.S.-South Korea relationship too. On July 30th, Trump stood on stage and announced a deal with Seoul. He said both countries were under it, and according to this deal, South Korea was going to invest $350 billion in America. Since then, it was the number on everyone's lips. It sounded huge. It sounded final. Except 3 months later, there's no written agreement, no signed text, and no timeline at all. Just promises, and one big question. Is this a real deal or simply a deal in Trump's head? But why did South Korea, a country that has stood beside the United States for generations, suddenly step back from a partnership it had publicly embraced? Well, there's one big mistake behind this, and once you know it, everything else starts to make sense. Why South Korea is turning away eyes, why Japan, the Philippines, and even Indonesia are quietly exploring other options. But what exactly is this mistake, and Trump's biggest mistake? It all started with one order from Trump to send nearly 300 South Koreans back home after labeling them as immigrants stealing American jobs. These people weren't random workers. They were employed at Hyundai's Georgia plant, one of the strongest symbols of U.S.-South Korea industrial partnership. Now, for Trump, it was just another move to impress his base. But that win turned into a disaster no one saw coming. Right after the incident, President Lee responded, "We are grateful to the United States for decades of partnership, but the era of unconditional dependence is over. Korea must protect its own interests." This news landed like a bomb inside the Trump administration. It made global headlines and brought huge embarrassment to Washington. But it didn't stop there. South Korean Labor Minister Kim Young-hoon went even harder in the Financial Times. The way it was done, not even prisoners of war would be treated like that. That was the shock many of our people felt. For U.S. foreign policy, statements like these, coming from top South Korean officials, were like political nukes. So, of course, Washington rushed to control the damage. The Trump administration claimed the deportations were internal politics, not hostility towards South Korea. And for a moment, Seoul gave them the benefit of the doubt. But when the truth came out, it hit Trump harder than he ever imagined. South Korea's secret partnership. While Trump waited for Seoul's response on the deal, a Bloomberg report dropped something shocking. The South Korean government had been exploring secret diplomatic channels with Beijing. Publicly, it was described as an attempt to stabilize the economy. But behind closed doors, it was a warning to Washington. South Korea now has options. The report said that during this quiet meeting, both sides discussed a new trade insurance system. And according to the South China Morning Post, China even proposed a deeper, trust-based supply chain partnership, covering electronics, rare earth materials, and advanced battery components. This was a setup that would work outside U.S. control. And this wasn't just some routine talk between mid-level officials. Singapore's Institute of Strategic Studies warned that this was more than economics. It was a political signal that South Korea no longer wanted to play inside Washington's tariff pressure game. When that news broke, Trump went on Truth Social and attacked Seoul, accusing it of double-dealing. He even threatened to reconsider America's military commitment on the Korean peninsula. So after such direct threats, what response did you expect from Seoul? Some angry statement? A diplomatic reply? There was nothing. Complete silence. But why? When you look closely, this isn't just about one country anymore. It's a pattern, a clear shift across Asia, moving away from U.S. dominance. A quiet revolution that has already begun and is moving faster than many experts expected. The fallout of American supremacy. In July this year, Donald Trump announced new reciprocal tariffs on imports from several countries. And among the major economies, Japan was the first to strike a deal with the U.S. to avoid higher duties. Under this agreement, Japan pledged to invest $550 billion in American industries over the next decade, mainly in critical energy sectors. But only a few weeks after what Trump called a historic deal, Japan's top trade negotiator, Ryosei Akazawa, suddenly canceled his trip to Washington. And guess what? This trip was actually supposed to finalize the details. Then later, on November 1st, 2025, Japan's new Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, said the government had no plans to renegotiate. In other words, Japan has clearly stepped back. The Philippines followed a similar path. They agreed to a 19% reciprocal tariff arrangement. But in October 2025, Trade Secretary Cristina Aldeguer Roque publicly called for renegotiation. Vietnam, which accepted a 20% tariff deal, also shifted its position soon after. Local media and analysts said the agreement looked more like bending under pressure than a success. Even Indonesia decided to take a second look at its deal. And now South Korea is also pulling away. But why is this happening? If you look closely, it's not only about tariffs. It's a sign that these Asian countries, once seen as America's closest strategic partners, are now finding new partners, one after another. And who are those partners? You guessed it, China. But not just China, also Russia, America's other major rival. This rise of the China-Russia axis is giving former U.S. allies new economic and political paths. And as a result, U.S. leverage is fading fast. And this shift isn't just happening in meeting rooms or government offices, it's happening among ordinary people too. A new Gallup Korea poll found that nearly half of South Koreans now believe their country should balance relations, not rely solely on the United States. TV programs openly ask whether the U.S. still guarantees stability. In other words, is depending on America still worth it? Because after what happened recently, especially how sanctions hurt South Korea's tech sector, the public mood is changing. And once the public shifts, governments eventually follow. They have to. But is there still a chance for the U.S. to stop this slide? Maybe. And that's where we go next. What happens next? On November 15th and 16th, President Donald Trump is set to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Peru. This is important for two reasons. One, it will be the first in-person meeting between the two leaders since Trump returned to the White House in January 2025. Two, it comes after months of tension, with the U.S. raising tariffs on Chinese goods and China hitting back with restrictions on U.S. agriculture and tech exports. The official agenda is still secret, but analysts say the talks could focus on a few major goals: a partial truce in the ongoing trade war, easing limits on semiconductor and AI tech exports, preventing further escalation. Now, if the meeting goes well, it could slow down the domino effect America is currently experiencing across Asia. But at the same time, some analysts warn this could end up as a nothing burger. Meaning, Trump may use the meeting only for domestic optics, with no real change in policy. And if that happens, U.S. influence in Indo-Pacific Asia will fade even faster. American think tanks are warning openly. If Washington doesn't adjust its tone, South Korea and other traditional allies will keep drifting toward new partners. And once that shift becomes permanent, there will be no way back. So, what do you think? Is America really losing its influence in Asia? Or is this just a temporary shift? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you liked this video, ensure you give it a thumbs up. Also, consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, because we will be uploading more crazy stories like this one in the coming weeks. Until then, see ya.